that spreads in the latter day illuminates the darkness of the extreme evil of slander, and the mystic wind of the Juryo chapter of Kuon blows away the gate of the provisional teaching that the Buddha achieved supreme enlightenment for the first time in Gaia. Ah, how rare it is to encounter the Buddhist law. It's as rare as to see the blossom of a udumbara, or for a one-eyed turtle to find a floating sandalwood log with a hollow of just the right size to hold him. Nay, these cannot suffice to describe the difficulty of encountering the mystic law. We have fortunately been able to encounter this sutra, that's to say the Gohonzon, due to a deep karmic connection. Accordingly, I will here set forth some articles for the sake of later students of Buddhism. This is solely because I treasure the Daishonin's golden words regarding Kosen Rufu.
Back page. Last page.
I have set forth these 26 articles for the sake of the eternal salvation and protection of humankind. Learned priests of later generations must not question these in the least. Those who violate even one of these articles cannot be called disciples of Nikko. To make this clear, I have formulated each of these precepts. Nikko.
Good, thank you. So, going to that preface again, just to make sure we're clear, the mystic wind of the Juryo chapter, which is mentioned there in the very first paragraph, means, of course, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. Nam-myoho Renge Kyo of the three great secret laws which blew away, as it were, the provisional teachings prior to the Lotus Sutra. That is the meaning of that. I think that's probably clear. And as you know, those three great secret laws, the Gohonzon of the Dai Gohonzon of the three great secret laws, just to remind you, one was the invocation of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. The second was the object of worship, the Gohonzon. And the third was the sanctuary, or high sanctuary, where the Dai Gohonzon is enshrined. So these are at the center of Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, and for that reason, at the Gojukai ceremony, those of you who have attended it, you made those promises, you remember, to keep those three secret laws intact in your own life. That is to say, you promised to keep Nam-myoho Renge Kyo as the only invocation and to discard all other invocations. And to keep the Gohonzon as your one and only object of worship, and to discard all previous objects of worship, and to observe the high sanctuary as of the Dai Gohonzon of the three great secret laws as the head temple at Taisekiji. So these were those promises that you made. Those of you who will go eventually to Gojukai, I presume, you will find having made those promises. So Nikko Shonin then moves on to explain his purpose and spirit in writing the 26 warnings. And in that sense, I think it's good just to ask Bill to read from Sensei's guidance on the significance of this. There to there, Bill.
For what purpose did he write down these warning articles? In the preface he states, I will set forth some articles for the sake of later students of Buddhism. This is solely because I treasure the Daishonin's golden words regarding Kosen Rufu. Again, in the concluding passage he writes, I have set forth these 26 articles for the sake of the eternal salvation and protection of humankind. Until the moment of his death, Nikko Shonin's life blazed with the great wish to accomplish Kosen Rufu and lead all people to happiness, to realize the Daishonin's decree. Herein lies the original spirit of the correct school of Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism. Again, in the concluding passage, Nikko Shonin strictly warns, those who violate even one of these articles cannot be called disciples of Nikko. These articles of warning were originally intended for priests. Nonetheless, we in the SGI, awakened to our mission as bodhisattvas of the earth, have strictly put these admonitions into practice.
Good, thank you. So, it's very clear, I think, the pressures that had been upon Nikko, why he wrote these warnings, bearing in mind the problem of the 5 elder priests, and his feelings are made much more vivid, I think, because we've all had to struggle with the problem of priests ourselves. And of course, it is important to remember in that respect that we are warned in so many places about priests and the problems they can create. So in the Buddha's, for instance, On the Buddha's Prophecy, if you turn up that Gosho in your volume 1, you'll find that it's all about betrayal by priests. The 3 strong enemies, as they're known, 2 are specifically priests. The first one is, could be a lay person who is very influential in society, though ignorant of Buddhism, and who attacks Buddhism. The second, however, is specifically priests who, as it's worded, think they have attained what they have not attained. That's how it's stated in the Buddhist dictionary. And the third, and because of that, believe that they are superior to all believers. And the third strong enemy, often through the communication of priests, is that the authorities, the ruling authorities of the land, turn on the religion in some way, stirred up by the priesthood in order to curry favor, so on. So, in a way, one wonders why we're all so surprised. Also, if you look at other religions, the problem, I think almost 10 cases out of 10, certainly 9 cases out of 10 in the history of those religions has been with priests, because the temptations are so great when you think about it. After all, religion, matters of the spirit, very delicate. We see the worst angle of it, of course, in these cults, where someone uses religion in the most appalling way to obtain control over other human beings. And I mean, it's incredible what human beings will do, I suppose, if they're desperate enough for some sort of person to lean on. Therefore, priests have so much power if they decide to use it. I heard a story the other day about a nun, and she gave up. Who told me this? Anyway, it was a non-member. But anyway, this nun, who this lady knew, gave up being a nun because she said, I can't stand being a leaning post or an umbrella for everyone anymore. Because she said, I'm not worth the leaning on, and I can't take it. So this was an honest woman. But it shows how vulnerable, really, human beings are. And it shows, above all things, how important actual proof is. Nichiren Shonin said, didn't he, that 3 proofs must be satisfied by the true religion. One being documentary or historical proof, the second being literary or literal proof in writing, documents, and the third, or theoretical proof, in other words, and the third is actual proof. And he said the last is the most important of all. This is the only way you can judge whether a teacher is right and what he's teaching is right, through actual proof in our own lives. Isn't it? Okay, enough. Dead on 3:10. and I'm sure you're gasping for a cup of coffee or something. So we come back when, Sarah? Can you shout it through the thing?
So we're back here at 20 to 4 and tea and coffee served upstairs in the galleries.
All right. We're verging on beginning to go through quite quickly the 26 warnings. Of course, some of them are very specifically for priests and are not totally applicable to us as lay people. That you'll discover in it's quite common sense way as we go through them. Let me just remind you again, Sensei's remark, and herein lies the original spirit of the correct school of Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism. And Nikko himself said, as Bill read to you, those who violate even one of these articles cannot be called disciples of Nikko. So even the standing and in terms of faith of Nikko Shonin has been slandered by High Priest Nichiren, because he has maintained that of the three treasures of the Buddha, the law, and the priest, he and he only is the treasure of the priest today. Whereas it was always made clear and reinstated time and again by high priests of Nichiren Shoshu, most recently by the 66th high priest Nitatsu, that in the specific sense, the treasure of the priest is only Nikko Shonin, the second high priest and successor to Nichiren Daishonin, who of course paved the way in which all other high priests in the future should conduct their role and function. So specifically, the meaning of the treasure of the priest is Nikko, the second high priest. In a general sense, the meaning of the treasure of the priest is all those priests and lay people who, with sincerity, set out to spread the teachings and work for the great cause of Kosen Rufu. They are, in the general sense, the treasure of the priest. So this definition was confirmed again, as I say, by the 66th high priest. And indeed, if you turn up the Buddhist dictionary, you will find that definition is confirmed in there. So in other words, you and I, all of us who work for Kosen Rufu, are part of the treasure of the priest. Why? Because, of course, without the person, the law would remain unknown and obscure. Therefore, in the Buddhist view, everyone who spreads the law is acting as one of the three treasures of Buddhism. Because without them, nothing would ever be achieved for the sake of the world or humanity. So I hope that's clear. So, in a way, studying as we are today, the 26 warnings, I think is a sort of rounding off. Bill was saying earlier, it feels that way. It's rounding off of an era, in a way, and the beginning of a new era. That there can be no doubt. How everything exactly works out, of course, only time will tell. But definitely it is the start of a new era. And by reaffirming the 26 warnings or admonitions of Nikko, we are laying or reaffirming the foundations of Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism for the future. So this is very, very important. And of course, not one of the reasons why I felt it necessary to talk directly to as many people in the UK as I could about this. And I'm sure it was also the reason why Sensei has lectured on it and President Akira and so on, is because of this, because it is the foundations. And because we have to bear in mind that at this particular point in time, there is no one who can guard these 26 warnings and make sure that they're adhered to, except SGI. Nichiren has already proved that he has disobeyed all of them. Therefore, there can be no trust that those who are practicing with the priesthood in the Danta organization will ever be taught about them anyway. It's extremely unlikely if the priests can't uphold them. So the responsibility for making sure that these 26 warnings go forward into the future as the basis for the whole spirit of Kosen Rufu rests with no one else but the members of SGI. But of course, this is not surprising, because the members of the SGI are, if they're sincerely spreading the teachings, fulfilling the role of the bodhisattvas of the earth as described in the Lotus Sutra all those thousands of years ago. Do you remember Shakyamuni in his allegory of the treasure tower and the ceremony in the air put the question to his disciples, who is going to spread the teachings of the great pure law in the dreaded age of Mappa? And his disciples, of course, put up their hands immediately, but he said, no, these are the people who will spread the teachings of the age of Mappa. And at that point in time, out of the earth, as it were, from nowhere, appeared a whole host of ordinary-looking human beings. And Shakyamuni said, these are the people who will spread the great pure law in that dreaded age. And then he defined your qualities, your courage, determination, qualities of being able to lead others and so on. So this is why this is such an important juncture, when it is clear. Where else do you see millions of bodhisattvas who are practicing the law and spreading it to others? If you can see that happening in any other organization in SGI, then we better know about it quick. But of course it doesn't exist. So this is an amazing thing. And of course, the heritage will pass on from you to others into the future. 10,000 years into eternity, the Lotus Sutra said. So this is our awesome responsibility in a sense. And this is why it's so important to know about these 26 warnings. Because whether or not they go forward to the future depends entirely on us, nobody else. So Mr. Todo wrote a poem after he had lectured on the 26 warnings to the youth division. It just said, you young people, engraving in your hearts the 26 precepts, dedicate your lives to the path of the mystic law. So there we are. We never thought we would have such an extraordinary task to fulfill. And of course, we're not alone. All over Europe, all over every continent of the world, there are growing groups of people who are coming to realize that they must be the bodhisattvas of the earth, just like we're realizing. And that their job, like our job in their particular country, is to spread the teachings and create through that an enormous, positive, valuable influence in the whole world, which will have its effect in every aspect of society. So now let's go on and have a look at them, starting, as you might expect, with Article 1. And we'll get Bill to read one by one, and I'll make a few comments where necessary. Is that okay? Yes. Oh, is it difficult to hear? Thank you. Right. Maybe my voice is fading away. Okay.
Article 1. The doctrines of the Fuji school must not differ in the least from the teachings of the late master.
So, of course, the Fuji school was the original name or title of what has been known in more recent times as Nichiren Shoshu. Nichiren Shoshu, the orthodox sect of Nichiren Buddhism, actually came into being in 1912. That's not very long ago at all in terms of history. So that was the Fuji school. We don't know what the priesthood is going to be called in the future. They may well have to change their name again, I think, because sadly in Japan, the name Nichiren Shoshu is disgraced in the eyes of all the public, because this whole business has been followed in all the newspapers for the last 2 years by the general public. So I think the important point here is that we have direct access to these teachings. The teachings must not differ in the least from the teachings of the late master. We have direct access to the teachings of the late master because in his wisdom, Mr. Toda, in the very early years after World War II, got the cooperation of a retired high priest at that time, the 59th high priest who'd retired. And he offered to help Mr. Toda in editing and producing the Gosho for the first time in a volume which was available to ordinary people everywhere. Never before was that possible. I think it was still on enormous scrolls and that sort of thing at the head temple. So with the help of this high priest, the Gosho Zenshu, as it's known, was produced, this great big volume, which Japanese members carry about with them, because it contains all the Gosho, all the teachings in one volume. Incredible achievement. This was a vital achievement, because before that, the members could have been at the mercy of anyone. But with the teachings and with the practice, every single member, according to the teachings of Nichiren Daishonin, can sum up their Buddhahood and make judgment on anything. So this is a very crucial point. No one in Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism can stand between you and the Gosho, or between you and the object of worship. You have to defend that absolutely with the whole force of your life, if in the future it's ever threatened, because it's fundamental to what Nichiren Daishonin taught. So probably there's no more serious words I've ever said to you than this, especially to those of you who are young. There's been a struggle this time, but there will be struggles again in the future. Inevitably, of course there will be. The whole business of Kosen Rufu is a battle against the negative force of life. So, of course, at times the negative force of life will try to hit out and hold up the process of the movement. But that is the key point. You have the object of devotion. You can chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. Nobody, even if they took your Gohonzon away from you, no one can take away from you the Buddhahood that is in your heart. Right? That's the point. So this is really fundamental. Everyone stands equal before the Gohonzon, and the teachings you have in your own hand. And you can chant the Daimoku for the wisdom to understand them. And of course, there will always be those who have, over the years, ahead of oneself, mastered the meaning. But even then, everything you can put to the test of your daimon. So this is a crucial point. Article 1 is absolutely so important. Yet, Nichiren tried to make out that he is now the treasure of the priest, and that in this day and age, it is his guidance which is actual, and Nichiren Daishonin's teachings are provisional, believe it or not. So anyway, this makes it very clear. Next one.
Article 2. The doctrines of the 5 senior priests differ in every regard from the teachings of the late master.
Well, this is confirming the fact that there are still in existence in Japan Nichiren sects which were founded by one or other of the 5 elder priests, and whose teachings, or the teachings of which, are slanderous. So they exist still in Japan, and you've all heard of other Nichiren sects, I'm sure. So this is confirming that the doctrines of those sects, because they were founded by the 5 senior priests, differ in every regard from the teachings of the late master. All right? So we can't go into all the differences now. But you want to take everything you hear from them with a pinch of salt, because if you go into it a little more deeply, you'll find they don't understand. Okay?
Article 3. There will in the future appear persons who slander our school, saying that the Gosho are forged writings. You must not associate with such evil priests.
Well, it's very interesting that the 5 elder priests stated that the Gosho were forged writings. This was one of the things they did after they had left Nikko, because Nichiren Daishonin had written them in the ordinary characters of the common person, whereas all scholars in those days in Japan wrote in classical Chinese characters. So Nichiren Daishonin deliberately wrote in the ordinary characters of the people, because he was writing to the people, and he wanted them to understand. But it was unheard of those days in Japan. It was rather similar, thinking about it, to, for instance, in the Middle Ages, which is after all what we're talking about in Japan. In the Middle Ages, scholars in this country wrote in Latin. They didn't write in the ordinary language of the people. And this made them somehow separate on a pedestal. People of great intellectual brilliance, because they could express themselves in Latin, which the common person couldn't understand. And maybe also they weren't all that keen on the common person being educated, because it made control over them that much more difficult. So anyway, it's interesting that this is what those elder priests said at the time. And of course it was absurd. So the Gosho are at the head temple in their original form, most of them. Some are copies made by Nikko, but the majority are the actual original. And it's extraordinary sight. Sometimes they've been on display. I saw them once on the 700th anniversary, I think it was, of the inscription of the Daigons. And they had this special exhibition of the original Gosho. Enormous scrolls that ran all the way around the room. But the ones that were done on, written by Nichiren Daishonin on Sado Island, were very moving, because they were still dirty, and bits of paper were joined together. There was no long length of paper as in other ones. And also in places, changing scratchings out. Not one bit of paper could be wasted by starting afresh, in other words. So really very moving to see these original, all of course written in the hand of the common people. So the only documents that are written in the classical Chinese characters by Nichiren Daishonin was the Risho Ankoku-ron and one or two of the doctrinal theses, true object of worship, I think is, and the person and the law, but anyway, very few. Mostly they were written in the hands of the people, so they could understand. Right.
Article 4. Those who produce forged writings and say that they are Gosho, or who practice with the view that the essential and theoretical teachings of the Lotus Sutra are the same, are parasites in the lion's body.
So as I've already said, Nichiren has declared that his guidance is the Gosho of today, basically. Nichiren Daishonin's Gosho are just provisional now. So, of course, the whole purpose of our study, or chapter study as we do, the whole purpose is to familiarize us, or help to familiarize us with the Gosho, and make sure that we're able to learn from it and deepen our faith throughout our time of practice. Okay?
Article 5. You should refrain from indulging in poetry or non-Buddhist works, or from engaging in idleness and chatter without having the aim of rebuking slander.
Right. Well, you can understand that more. I'll ask Bill to read a small passage from the Gosho, which also explains that. If you want to check it later, it's in the Major Writings, Volume 3, page 215.
The Daishonin states, though one may have been fortunate enough to be born as a human being, if he fails to study Buddhism and to refute its slanderers, but simply spends his time in idleness and chatter, then he is no better than an animal dressed in priestly robes.
So, of course, this is specifically directed at the priest. I think it gives an idea of the sort of person a priest should be. Someone who is really devoting their lives to serving the Buddha. And such people, I have no doubt whatsoever, exist. People who have that desire in their hearts. And in the Gosho, you may have heard me quote it before, Nichiren Daishonin said about priests, they should be people of small desires who are content with what they have. That was the way he put it. So I think this particular article is referring to that. But also, of course, it does refer to all of us as well. In other words, we don't want to waste time. But this happens quite naturally, I think, as you grow in faith. So you desire to be doing things that are valuable. And you discover from time to time that certain things that you are doing are not giving you any happiness. And probably the basic reason may be that it's nothing of great value to you or to anybody else. But this is a natural thing that happens in one's life. So please don't think that you're being asked to behave in an unnatural way. Using time valuably is part of the human revolution, and it'll happen in every one of your lives in a way, whether you like it or not, as long as you keep chanting. Okay?
Article 6. Lay believers should be strictly prohibited from visiting heretical temples and shrines. Moreover, priests should not visit slanderous temples or shrines which are inhabited by demons, even if only to have a look around. To do so would be a pitiful violation of the Daishonin's Buddhism. This is not my own personal view. It wholly derives from the sutras of Shakyamuni and the writings of Nichiren Daishonin.
I'm sorry, before we get on to that one, reference the previous one, something I forgot to say was that, of course, that particular article, number 5, it does also emphasize the value of study for us. We should try hard to go to chapter study. Because whatever happens, if one goes, there's bound to be something we can learn. Apart from anything else, even though we may have heard the lecture on that Gosho before, we will have done maybe a year or two's human revolution since we heard it the previous time. And therefore we shall get much more out of it on the new occasion. So one should go to chapter study. It's part of one's training in faith. And it's absurd to think that one carries this responsibility of spreading the teachings if we don't know or understand the teachings ourselves. So one should go. What's it there for? Unless one goes. But of course there may be occasions where you have to judge, well, what is the right thing to do for Kosen Rufu? If your mother's ill or something or other, you have to give up the idea of going to chapter study. Or if there's some even important family reunion, say, where if you're not there, your parents will be bitterly disappointed or something. Oh, you have to go to that. So it's what's best for Kosen Rufu. It's not best for Kosen Rufu to make enemies of your parents. Or it's not best for Kosen Rufu to fail your exams. So one has to make that judgment. But generally speaking, we should go to study. There can be no doubt about that. If we think we understand this Buddhism without going to study, that's just, big-headedness, isn't it? Right, going on to this one. Perhaps if I read it again, Bill.
Article 6. Lay believers should be strictly prohibited from visiting heretical temples and shrines. Moreover, priests should not visit slanderous temples or shrines which are inhabited by demons, even if only to have a look around. To do so would be a pitiful violation of the Daishonin's Buddhism. This is not my own personal view. It wholly derives from the sutras of Shakyamuni and the writings of Nichiren Daishonin.
Well, this does refer to priests, of course, and priests, generally speaking, always wear their robes or some indication that they are a priest. So it would be a very strange thing for a priest of Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism to go into a heretical temple or make a habit of doing so. I sort of understand what they mean by inhabited by demons, because if you go on a sightseeing tour in Japan as an ordinary layperson who practices Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, I can assure you that if you go in as a sightseer into these temples of heretical sects, they do give you the heebie-jeebies, actually. To start with, they're usually dirty and very dusty and dark, and rather like a sort of museum in a way. There's very little sign, in fact, no sign of anything to do with faith being practiced at all, except the members of the public who are entering at the gate, clap their hands 3 times, I think, and then throw a few coins into a container. So there's not much else sign of religion or spiritual exercise at all. This may not apply to some of the Zen temples, but certainly to many of the other main temples. So as I say, anyway, the atmosphere in a lot of them is really not very attractive, to put it in as simple a way as possible. And I had to take round a couple from this country who were guests of Sensei 2 or 3 years ago. And I don't know how many temples we went into in the process of our visit to Kyoto. But I did chant Nam-myoho Kyo strongly inside myself when I entered each temple, and I chanted again when I left strongly, and I really felt I needed to do it. I didn't like the feel of the places at all. And it was interesting that the Sensei's guests, who were non-members, were absolutely overwhelmed when they got to Taisekaji, because they could feel the difference between all these temples we'd been in and out of. Historical places, of course, but compared with the sort of living vivacity, really, in a way, vibrance in Taisekaji, there's just no comparison. And they very much remarked on it. So anyway, I don't think we want to make a habit of it. And I do recommend that if you're going in as a sightseer, you chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo on the way in and the way out, just to make sure that you're left with a pure feeling within you. Okay?
Article 7. Disciples of ability should be allowed to devote themselves to the study of the Gosho and other doctrines of Buddhism without being pressed to perform miscellaneous services for their teachers.
How about that? I've already told you. 8 hours Gosho instruction in 1 year is the normal syllabus for a priest, for a young priest. And in fact, they spend all their time serving their seniors. So even if a priest goes in, which they can do up to the age of 57, they were able to join the head temple. Even at 57 years old, they would still have to spend at least 8 years serving their senior priests and washing and laundering and cleaning for them. Incredible. Well, here's the very clear instruction from Nikko. Okay?
Article 8. Those of insufficient learning who are bent on obtaining fame and fortune are not qualified to call themselves my followers.
Well, that again, I think, is something that is reiterated often by Sensei, that happiness doesn't come through fame and fortune. And for a priest, of course, I've already mentioned Nichiren Daishonin's words of being a person of small desires who is content with what he has. So it doesn't go. The two things don't go together. As a layperson, of course, that's entirely different. But still, as a disciple or follower of Nichiren Daishonin, foremost in our minds and actions should be Kosen Rufu. So I believe one of the great examples of that I can think of as an illustration is Herbie Hancock, who is one of the most successful jazz musicians in the world, as you know. And he must have made enormous sums of money in his lifetime, but he never, ever forgets Kosen Rufu. And wherever he goes to perform, he does shakubuku. He introduces people to the practice. And he and those members, those who are members in his band, always never unfailingly do daimoku and chant as much daimoku as they have spare time to do during their tours. So he, of course, is materially very prosperous, but his life is always for Kosen Rufu. And if you ever have a chance of meeting him, you'll discover that. Good.
Article 9. Until they are well versed in the difference between the provisional and true teachings, followers of later generations should visit this temple, setting aside the debt of gratitude they owe to their parents and teachers,